Some minor technical issues, but I think we managed to get everything done. I'm looking. There's an image, good. I hope you can hear me. I'll check it again on an additional device. Yes, I can be heard. So I'm starting the stream, even though there aren't that many viewers watching. I hadn't planned this stream. Why is that? Because I'm not really a YouTuber, and I don't really like putting myself out there. But a friend gave me an idea to just try. To talk about my work this way, about the artworks on these boards. On ammunition crates. Because this is a part of a crate. A big one, it held ammunition and was brought from Ukraine. So the idea is basically, since 2014, because the first such pieces were made back then, to transform what had previously been used to carry death into something that would carry the image of good, a positive image. These pieces are occasionally sold or auctioned, and in that way I raise funds for my foundation. Funds that let me continue working calmly later in Ukraine to have the means to keep going. And what exactly I do in Ukraine, I'll explain in a moment. For now, I'll just keep working. We'll see, maybe someone, somewhere, someday will see this recording, because in the end it doesn't disappear. What will I be doing here? I'll be painting icons. All the works are interpretations of Byzantine icons. Interpretations of various icons, even though we're not dealing with a typical icon. There have even been commissions of priests or other clerics in seminaries formed to determine whether such work is appropriate. An icon has its rules, of course, it has its canon and clearly defined boundaries. Although I suppose it depends on how one approaches the icon. How we treat this form of painting. I treat it as a form of evangelization and also a way of searching for goodness in all of this. Especially after experiencing war and working in Ukraine, which I'll speak about shortly, it's the icon that speaks to me the most. It was the icon that led me down this path, and I believe I'm not doing anything wrong. Here you can already see a bit of a sketch, which I'll move a bit because it ended up right over a hole. All these burn marks on the board are proof that this is an original piece of an ammunition crate brought from Ukraine, from the front lines. Here we have a small piece of a marking that remained. I try, when cutting the crates, to preserve some marking. Sometimes there are stamps in the middle, sometimes in other places. There needs to be some proof that this is a real crate. And my photos and reports from Ukraine can be seen on the Foundation's website. You'll find the link in the description of this video. What will I be doing here? Here, I'll be painting the icon of Our Lady, Undoer of Knots. It all depends on how one believes, whether they believe in so-called novenas or trust in the existence of the Virgin Mary. I don't want to get into a discussion today about religious forms. These shapes you see here, cracked and carved out holes, were burned out using electricity, using energy. So, the board had electricity applied to it, and it carved these lightning shapes. That form, I think it's interesting. Of course, the artworks that will be created, because now a series is being made, will be available for purchase to support my continued work in Ukraine. I'll be painting and talking about what I do in Ukraine. Me in Ukraine? I first arrived in Ukraine in 2020, and since then, I've been going back regularly. I got there because of icons. In Lviv, or actually in both Lviv and Kiev, there's this thing called the development of the contemporary icon, and that's what caught my interest. I was invited to international plein air gatherings. And that's how my relationship with Ukraine started. I was a bit overwhelmed by it all because I'm Polish. And of course, there's that historical issue with the massacre of Poles in Volhynia. So at first I was somewhat afraid of Ukraine. Later, I met many people. And then in 2014, during a plein air event in Kiev, I ended up, so to speak, at war. It was the first time I was taken to visit soldiers. That's when I met Lieutenant Colonel Sobko, who is now General Sobko. Back then, he was simply the commander of the 30th Brigade from Zwickau. And my first impression of those soldiers was as follows. Back then, they really had nothing. It looked tragic, and a war had already started. By then, it was real. It wasn't like they had just suddenly started a war. It had already been going on in Donbass for quite some time. And that's when I created my first war-related works, and I began helping during the war, as a kind of combat medic or battlefield responder. Then it happened that I saw the tragedy of children who are there, who have nothing, are not to blame for anything, and have no other options. They just experience war. That's it. And it's happening right next to them. That's why we organize collections for the children, and I traveled to different places, together with the Polish diaspora. At first, I worked with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Then I met the Polish community in Zwickau, and Miss Victoria Shevchenko. That convinced me more, to be with people who speak a language I understand. They also seem to think more like Poles than with the Ukrainian mindset. The Ukrainian way of being. At first, it was hard for me to find my place, but I really wanted to travel there, to help, to support it all in some way. And at one point, in 2016, I was offered to deliver aid to the Arka Center near Mariupol, specifically in Pioneers, a village nearby. They're in old, abandoned hotels for children. Well, not hotels, more like children's summer camps. They set up a center that took in children from the Mariupol area, from villages they're already affected by war at the time. It was by the sea. Many of these children had either lost their parents or were losing their world because the parents struggled with alcoholism or other bad things were happening. These kids ended up in that center. It worked on the principle of freedom. The children could come and grow there. They weren't forced into it like an orphanage or anything like that. They could stay with their parents' permission. And often those children stayed there. So we began working with those children. And it was a fantastic thing, because these kids slowly began to grow up in a more Catholic environment. They experienced a different world, one where a family could be normal, where there didn't have to be alcohol, violence, or all the bad things. Today, those children have been evacuated. They're in Zakarpattia in Ukraine. There, we're creating a center and continuing to care for them. But we're facing serious challenges because the propaganda about what's happening, or maybe even not propaganda, but what's happening politically, also kills the good that's being done. Unfortunately, that's very hard to overcome even for us. It's hard for us too at times to find our place in all of this. But the children are there, and some of them are already 15 years old, and we managed to evacuate them from Mariupol, which was an enormous challenge. The last children were evacuated wearing full protective vests. It was a return to the trauma they had already experienced, because earlier they lived in villages that had been shelled. They knew what it meant, what bombs were. Some of them, 2 children, witnessed the death of a parent who died from an anti-personnel mine. And these are the children we care for. Since then, I also began working with the Christian Rescue Service and traveling to the East to provide support as a medic and to offer material and spiritual help to soldiers. I met many soldiers. Many of them had what's called a Pols card, meaning they had Polish roots. Many were drafted into the army, whether they wanted to or not, or simply had no other choice and went. Tough stories. And when the war broke out, we began helping and traveling at full capacity. The children were evacuated from Mariupol to Poland, and we began going deeper into the front lines there. We had friends in Ukraine, and that's more or less the story. As of today, my main work in Ukraine is as someone who intervenes or provides help. In PTSD situations, meaning severe symptoms of anxiety disorders caused by the experience of war. Not always war. Sometimes the trauma comes from other sources. Usually, the problems come from war. We simply try to save the soldier's soul. It's not just about saving the soldier in some extraordinary material way, though we help with that too. We help because not everyone can cope with all of it. Not everyone can handle it mentally. And what strikes me the most about this whole political issue with Ukraine is that people completely forget that amid it all, there are human beings who ended up in the army and were left with nothing. They were left there, in the army, and just exist like that. They go through trauma, severe trauma. Because if someone isn't a trained soldier, then it's really difficult. And sadly, the consequences of not being trained or prepared are also enormous. Even trained soldiers suffer from PTSD. It's like a disease that follows them. A so-called post-traumatic shock, which appears in these soldiers as a result of what they see and what they live through. Obviously, these are not easy things. It's war. It's not like we're standing here, they're standing there. We shoot a little, then take a break. At any moment you can lose your life. And that's already a difficult experience. You can ask questions in the chat, because it's not always easy to just keep talking. What we do, what we encounter among soldiers, not just PTSD, but many soldiers. Come back to faith, try to rediscover belief in God. They become aware that above all this, there is still God. And that's something remarkable, because we come in and we run into problems. Of course, we have our commanders, whom we trust, who are simply with us. And they are the ones who call us first. For example, I used to go regularly to one general, so he could emotionally unload. How does it work? We go off to the side somewhere, hide ourselves, and he then talks about what he's going through, what troubles him, how much it hurts him. Sometimes it also happens that regular soldiers come to us when they have a moment, and they come asking for prayer, asking for a moment to talk. And then they admit that they are non-believers, and they realize that without God, without a relationship with Him, everything is falling apart for them completely. And then we help them through conversation too. Sometimes they come. There are also situations where intervention is needed because a soldier is having such a severe PTSD episode that he might try to. I don't want to say it out loud because YouTube might block it. And then you have to go to him and intervene, meaning break him out of that state. Sometimes guys come to us who have just gone through a very deep shock, like having been at what's called zero, and simply saw what they saw. They were shooting or doing other things. And afterward, all those emotions and that pain have to be released somehow, and they shut down. We just know ways to help calm them down a little. Of course, this isn't lasting. Therapy, it's simply first aid in a moment of psychological crisis. And that's what our work is about. I was supposed to finish the story about the general. Well, for example, sometimes we go out somewhere with the general and he cries, lets it all out, shouts. He just releases all those emotions. And why am I saying this? I'm saying it so that we can realize these are not walking machines without emotions. They do have emotions, and very strong ones. And they also see everything that's going on outside the military and outside of what we ourselves can see. Because in the media, especially social media, we see a totally different situation. We tend to focus more on the loud stuff, the political situation. But individual tragedies are happening too. And that's very difficult. And that's exactly what my work is about. I was supposed to comment on how I see the future President Donald Trump, or already president. Yes, there was an inauguration. So how do I see it? I have serious doubts whether it will be possible to just end this war like that. Because a lot of people are profiting from this war. And it's not like Poland isn't, because Poland is too. Poland is making money from it as well. I don't want to say it out loud, because that's not the point. I don't want it to be interpreted that way. But I do want to comment on it. This really won't be easy. Let's hope they'll be able to stop the war. And let's hope that the Ukrainians, those who have stayed, will have enough strength to now take on the reform of their country. If that doesn't happen, then basically, it will be difficult for this country. What the soldiers are saying, and what's concerning to me, is that most of them are kind of breaking down. In terms of motivation and the sense of continuing the fight. And with that breakdown, they end up saying straight out, if a border opens, they'll run. They'll just flee. And we need to be aware that they'll flee to us. They won't go somewhere else. If we don't start acting now, helping them with this trauma, then every one of them coming back from the front, if they cross over into Poland, let's say, they'll bring that trauma with them. And over there, treatment for such trauma is very poor. I don't know if we shouldn't already be focusing on making sure we don't end up bringing in people with that kind of psychological collapse. Because that trauma, it's hidden, and then it can suddenly explode, and different things can happen. And whether we can deal with that, I don't know. That's why this mission of mine, and it's not just mine, because there are many chaplains, there's a specially formed group of people appointed by Bishop Gancharuk to visit soldiers. We have special ID cards to allow us to go and speak with them. And we talk. Are there good outcomes from it? Yes, very often. I recently had a conversation, for example, with a man from the SBU, that's the Secret Service over there. And right away, he said he was not a believer and asked what we even wanted there. What was our purpose? And I told him, in fact, I didn't come here to convert you. That's not the point. But at least let me give you a hug, human to human. Let's not make a scene about needing to be a believer just to talk with each other. And during the conversation, it turned out that he had been deeply hurt by the church, by other institutions, and by life itself, to the point that he had lost his faith. But deep down, He had a great longing for God. And indeed, somewhere along the way, he started to move toward God by the end of those talks. Because, it takes time. It's not just 2 minutes, sometimes it takes all night. You sit and talk, if he is able, of course. And he asks really difficult questions. Sometimes it's hard to find your bearings in all of it. It's not that simple. But the outcome was that he said he might actually want to find out if he was ever baptized, and so on. So there are some results of our work. There was also a case where we were driving, and we saw a soldier on a bridge, unarmed, but we could tell something was wrong. It looked like he was going to jump, like he had had enough, and we responded right away. Fortunately, we managed to intervene, and he didn't do it, and slowly things are starting to fall into place. What's tragic for them, unfortunately, is that even if a psychiatrist or someone else confirms they have serious issues, that it might be the end for them, the command will just wave it off like, "You'll manage, right?" And they send him back to the front lines. It's awful. But there's no one else. I mean, people are starting to flee, and not because they don't want to defend their country, like propaganda says, that they don't care that their country doesn't matter to them. No, it's just that the political situation is so difficult and so unchangeable that they lose all sense of purpose. They simply don't see any meaning in all of this, any further point in fighting. And sometimes there are mass desertions, even now, because the state gives them nothing. The state will give them nothing, and that's why they run. At some point, although it's really hard once you're in the army, or once you've been pulled into all of this, it's very hard to escape. So they stay, they try to fight, they try to win something. Are there cases of really low morale? No, they try to save themselves. Of course, even within the army, just like it happens in Poland. And it's also noticeable, there are bad structures, meaning someone becomes a commander without any real experience. But there are also commanders who are incredibly devoted to it all. We, for example, know this one logistics officer we visit. The way he manages to equip everyone, how he knows where to find the money and get things done. We're always amazed by how seriously and sincerely he treats it, that he cares and that it matters to him. And really, if you're in his battalion, you're doing okay. But otherwise, it's really mixed, because there are a lot of people who just, let's be honest, they give up and they just don't care. They just leave it behind, and it doesn't matter to them. They're just... What matters is sending someone to the front, that's it. And they stay in a safe place. It looks different in every case. I think we shouldn't judge it as something unique to Ukraine. I suspect that if war broke out in our country, it would look the same. And that wouldn't be great. It wouldn't be some noble affair. For now, we criticize Ukraine very harshly, that they're fleeing, that they're not defending their country. Criticism that they're exploiting Poland or political conflicts. But if we were in that situation, would it be any better for us? Why am I still working there? And why do I want to keep doing it? Because I'm in direct contact with those who are directly experiencing the war, directly experiencing the consequences of this war. I go to visit a soldier who has 2 children at home, a wife who's waiting for him, and he's out there somewhere on the front line. Meanwhile, on Facebook, he sees youth in other cities partying, dancing, doing what seem like strange things. Not strange really, just natural. So they don't go crazy, because you can go insane if you're locked in state-imposed isolation. And the next hard thing for him is seeing how someone higher up the chain of command is stealing from others, not paying them, finding some petty reason to take away his hard-earned money, and so on. And I go to that soldier, and I talk to him. And then I come back to Poland, where the entire perspective is different, where people see everything through the lens of politics. And politics. Because what can that person do, the one who's out there on the front, or the one on whose village or city a bomb falls? What is that person supposed to do? How is he supposed to stop it? There's no way to stop it. And they're left all alone with it, so helpless. We're trying to help, yes, but it's very little now. It must be admitted that in the beginning there was a lot of help, and now there still is, but it's very limited. We can see that clearly in our foundation. And honestly, a lot of aid was diverted somewhere else. A great deal of aid ended up being sold. From the European Union. They put up some little houses somewhere, and then the EU billed Ukraine for the money as funds for helping Ukraine. Supposedly for reconstruction. It all just goes in circles. It's all one big business operation. But there are still people left who have no way out. Because what exactly is that soldier supposed to do? And I go out there to see these soldiers. And I'll admit, I also get a lot of reflection from them. I was there recently. And there's this soldier who's a lawyer by education. He has a whole law firm. One of the better law firms in Ukraine. And he's always so happy when we come to visit. And he likes to have discussions too. He always asks, "What's the attitude toward us in Poland?" And I tell him, "Look, there are problems. For example, we still have the issue of Volhynia, the Volhynian exhumations. We disagree with the fact that Ukraine keeps blocking it while, for example, allowing the exhumation of Wehrmacht soldiers, which is completely bizarre." And then he shocks me with a question like, "But Hubert, what's the deal with this Volhynia thing? What is Volhynia?" That's when I start to realize that they were raised on a version of history written by the Soviets. As a result, they have no awareness that something actually happened. And they often just completely sort of don't have any concrete information, just some vague idea that it was a brotherly war or something like that. And that something like that happened somewhere at some point. They have this very scattered information. And they often truly have no awareness that something like that even happened. And only when you start talking about it do these soldiers begin to understand, and they ask, "So why won't our politicians allow the exhumation?" And here we are, a big question mark. Most likely, it's simply due to Russian influence. Very much so. And that could well be the case. So this Polish outrage of ours, that outrage should be directed at the politicians, not at the people who, in fact, don't even know that such a thing ever happened. And that's often how it is, that's how I see it, that they are basically unaware that something like that took place. And first, we need to raise awareness. And I doubt anyone will accept any truth about it if we approach it in a rather aggressive way. I don't think anyone learns history or accepts facts that way. You people, your grandfathers, well, that just doesn't work. Not at all. And what is their attitude toward us? I've never encountered any aggression toward a Pole in Ukraine. Never. especially since I usually have a Polish flag on me, whether on the front or just traveling around Ukraine, because I have that identification. I've never had anyone try to attack me just because I'm Polish, or because of the whole grain issue, that we don't want their grain. There were questions about it, they had questions about it, but only after they were informed that the grain issue doesn't work the way they think, because they really believe the grain being exported to Europe is actually Ukrainian. But the truth is, it's already been sold, and those European companies are the actual owners of that production. And in reality, not a single euro or a hryvnia from that grain stays in Ukraine. So it doesn't really work the way they think. It doesn't bring them anything. These are just business deals. That's all it is, business. When they are informed, then they actually agree because they say, yes, in our case, the land was bought up by others. The land or those producing companies were bought up, and it's now not our business anymore. If you check the internet, you can confirm that too. And then they finally understand, and they don't get upset about it anymore. They just say, well, it is what it is. They regret that it looks like this. I often get apologies from soldiers for the Ukrainian politicians. They're often aware that everything looks bad. When it comes to corruption and related issues, yes, it's there. I think it's a Soviet style of thinking. That's what I think it is. There, it just works like that, and it's not only about corruption among the big political elites or oligarchs. Corruption operates in very simple things. You can't get anything done without offering some chocolate or something. That's how it works, that's the mentality. And I honestly doubt that this mentality can be changed in 5 minutes. Probably not. So that's what I see when it comes to the difficult situation with the soldiers. And what else do we often talk about with them? I notice that these soldiers don't really show, they simply don't have this extraordinary level of aggression toward the Russians. About them, they simply say, just go away already. Why are you even attacking us in the first place? It's more like they just want to go home and live their lives. And that's very difficult. Right now, for example, a really difficult situation is what's happening in Bukovel and other tourist spots, where there are crowds of people. And basically, among the soldiers there are two opinions. Some say, that doesn't bother us, because we are here precisely so that there can still be a possibility for the country to function normally. We are defending this country so that the economy can still operate despite the war. And it's also not like many people say, that the oligarchs ran away, that they don't give any money. No. It's very harmful to generalize. I experienced this strongly in Ukraine because I personally know several oligarchs who have truly opened up their estates. They have no problem helping soldiers. For example, a man who owned hotels in the East, an oligarch, he opened all his hotels and now they serve the soldiers. You can withdraw and go there to rest. All of his hotels operate like that. They are fully open and completely free. Soldiers can wash themselves, do laundry, take care of other needs, sleep. Most importantly, because sleep is the most important thing in such a situation. So it's not also one-sided. It always bothers me because I see different comments under our videos. Recently, there's this one video that's getting a lot of views. And there are comments like, just give the oligarchs the money, best of all. That's not what it's about. Above all, we don't give money to anyone. It doesn't work that way. Even if I trust someone. If I trust someone, we buy equipment. We buy what's actually needed. For example, recently we bought washing machines because soldiers returning from the front don't really have anywhere to get cleaned up. And you do need to get cleaned up somehow, because at the front there's unfortunately no showers or toilets. So when they pull back, they have to get cleaned somehow. So we bought them those things. We always buy equipment, and specific equipment. And now in Transcarpathia somehow, I don't even know how this is happening, honestly. We're building a rest and spiritual rehabilitation center for soldiers. Right now we already have 3 wooden houses built. The Ukrainians just came and built them for us, basically for free. We pay for the materials so that the company doing the work doesn't go bankrupt. But they honestly said, "We want to help you, we can build these houses for you. You'll just have to pay for the materials because unfortunately we can't afford to put up that much money." And that's how they help us. A lot of people help us like that over there in Ukraine. It's not true that everyone has run away from Ukraine now. Because sometimes I get the impression from Polish opinions that everyone fled to Poland. Well, no, that's not true. It doesn't work that way. As for Poland, in Poland, there's this propaganda that Ukrainians are very negative. There are all sorts of videos on TikTok from many Poles. Many people don't distinguish between the Russian and Ukrainian languages. And that's one of the bigger tragedies. Because most of the people doing all these weird things that ruin the reputation of Ukrainians here speak Russian, not Ukrainian. So maybe they're not really Ukrainians after all. Not entirely anyway. And that's very strange. A lot of the refugees here really do some strange things. But also, I don't want to defend those who are making a mess of things, because sometimes even I feel like giving some of them a slap, but I don't think that's the solution. I believe our authorities should start dealing with this, and people who are doing weird things should be deported. But there are also many who have really lost everything. People talk about how some oligarchs came over, driving fancy luxury cars, and now they're living off our taxes and so on. But I don't think that's entirely true. First of all, we need to consider that in Ukraine, the cars that come here are worth very different prices than they are here. So it's a bit different when it comes to those cars. Secondly, there are plenty of people, I know some, who came here with, like, maybe $50,000 and in their pocket. But he left everything behind. He left a country he won't be able to return to. And he has to start his life over, maybe with 3 kids already. So I don't know if that really deserves criticism, just because he showed up in one kind of car or another. Another thing that annoys me about this propaganda being spread is the idea that Ukrainians shouldn't be allowed to use the 800+ program or state benefits. But statistics show that the taxes they've paid through their work would actually cover nearly 3 times the 800+ payment. So maybe we Poles are being a bit unfair about that. Although even I sometimes have doubts about whether it should be this way. But that's just how it is. You're always going to have some doubts. Why do I keep going back and helping, despite what I see, despite what I go through? Because I do face hate in Poland. Because after all, those Ukrainians behave badly. And why even bother going there? Let them die over there, and so on. No, because I've experienced that this is a human being. And first and foremost, you are a human. Only then do you belong to a specific country or nation. You are a human first. These are people, truly people, often very lost in everything that's going on. There's often this question about corruption, and I do talk about it, but what am I supposed to do? That's how this country works. This country won't give us anything else. We just have to find a way to deal with it. And then I ask myself too, what options do these guys on the front really have? What options does he have? What is he supposed to do? Write a letter to the president asking him to change things? There's just no way. So I think that's why I just keep going and keep helping. I'm not pulling back my help. Secondly, I also have the responsibility for the children who were adopted by Volodymyr and Oksana. And that's really something amazing, because we can see the fruits of that. Some of those children have been with us since 2016, or actually 2015, because they started their work in 2015. And we see how those kids have changed, what they were like when they came. They were broken and traumatized. And how are they now? They've changed. One of the girls, Gayla, once left the center, moved away, and then came back to us. As of today, she's a caregiver, she has a husband, and she works with all the children. And we raise these kids, or rather, we form them to be raised in a Christian spirit, but also wisely, to understand that corruption and things like that are evil and must not be tolerated. They don't get everything handed to them either. They have to earn some things themselves. They have a farm with rabbits and other animals. Chickens, they have to go and take care of them. They go to school, they're being shaped, and really, we see the very positive fruits of this long-term help we directed toward these kids. Because honestly, believe me, their behavior. Well, we say here they're from broken homes. Those behaviors were exhausting. At times it was just unbearable, and we really felt like saying, enough. We can't do this anymore, we're too weak to keep raising them. We just couldn't do it. To keep raising them somehow. But over time, that changed, and it actually worked out. And some of these children are already quite well raised. We also have a girl named Darinka and her sister. One of the girls, has cerebral palsy. And Darinka came to us with her mother, who was suffering from cancer. And their father, because of the child's cerebral palsy, abandoned the child, abandoned the entire family. The mother was left with nothing. She was seriously ill in an advanced stage of cancer. So she was sent to Switzerland. We somehow managed to get her there, hoping she might get treatment. But unfortunately, it didn't work out, and she eventually passed away. And the children stayed with us. Even now, the First Lady of Ukraine has contacted our center with a request to take in another 4 children, the children of a soldier. Of 2 soldiers, actually, because the mother was a soldier, and the father was a soldier too. And that soldier, before his death, asked specifically that the children be placed in our center, because he was afraid of what would happen to them. So that's what this work looks like. Despite the fact that even the First Lady has reached out to us, we're facing serious financial difficulties. We simply don't have enough funds to keep going. And there's a huge resistance when it comes to people supporting us, because this propaganda is destroying us. But we're not giving up. We believe that we'll manage. someone always shows up and gives a few euros, and then we can keep going. We can go further. Right now, I'm working on a new art exhibition using ammunition boxes. I hope these works will be sold again, auctioned off. And thanks to that, I'll be able to go back again to the soldiers and help them there. Also to support my foundation because after all, we also have to do accounting, we have our own expenses, bookkeeping, and everything costs money. I don't see any questions in the chat. I see there are maybe 4 people watching, so I think I'll slowly wrap up this live stream. Unless someone has a question, I'll answer it. As you can see, the face of the Virgin Mary is starting to take shape. Of course, once I finish the piece, I'll show it. I've basically been talking for an hour. I really am quite the talker. I hope someone out there will eventually see this live stream. I don't know. For now, I'm waiting for comments to see whether it's even worth doing these live streams, whether it's worth setting a regular time for them, whether people will tune in and take an interest, and whether this could be a way to talk with one another. It's not about becoming some mega YouTuber here, but I would like to share what I experience myself, whether in Ukraine or here in Poland, working on Byzantine iconography. I warmly invite you to the channel. You can subscribe. You can reach out in the comments. On the channel you can also find icon writing workshops, free ones, which you can take advantage of. I also wholeheartedly encourage you to get in touch with the foundation and most importantly, to support this work. To follow the channel, even just because of the exhibition. I plan to finish the catalog of those works and poems this month. Poems related to Ukraine, to what I've experienced while being there. Oh, and I was supposed to say why I work as maybe not as a specialist, but providing first aid in PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Because I experienced that trauma myself. Post-traumatic shock. Maybe one day I'll talk about it, but I've also spoken about it already on the channel Meski Rozmowy. You can find that channel and my story is there. Good evening, it will be beautiful. I also paint, although... Well, greetings to Miss Bogoslava, of course, warmly. I'm glad that you also paint, absolutely. It's a kind of spiritual experience. So you also understand what it's like to go through that spiritual process while painting, that a person finds those personal reflections and has time for. And probably as an artist, one would always like. I mean, maybe. I don't know if it should be called artist, because to me the word artist has negative connotations nowadays, because the word has been so distorted. As an artist, you would want what you paint to also carry a spiritual message, that it reaches a future owner or even many people, to reach them in order to heal, to build relationships. Here, on these boards, this is my own vision. It's not just about reworking things. Reworking all of this into something good. Because right here in the middle there was a bomb. This is a bomb or ammunition crate board. This is actually a board from... Yes, it's a board from those rocket bombs. And to transform that into good, but also to build relationships, to see that in all the evil of this world, in this evil that we as humans have created, because we do create evil, to realize that this evil can actually be turned into good, and that it's possible, and that it has meaning. Thank you, Miss Bogoslava. Yes, someone has already left. All right, I'll end today's broadcast now and see what comes out of it. The stream and see what comes out of it. Whether anyone will watch it or not, we'll keep trying to do something. We'll keep trying to do something. Best regards. Warm greetings to everyone who may be watching this in the future. And to Mrs. Boguslawa, who wrote in. So well. Good night because it's already 10:25 p.m. All the kids should be asleep,